Prisons are built to keep society safe from criminals. But what happens when the person behind the badge becomes a predator? Welcome back to Final Chapter. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you for your support. Before sunrise, unmarked SUVs rolled into a quiet neighborhood. Inside the house at the end of the street, a woman in sweatpants checked her phone one last time, unaware that a dozen agents were about to knock on her door. She wasn't a fugitive. She wasn't an ex-con. She was a decorated correctional officer, someone sworn to keep criminals behind bars. Yet for nearly a year, investigators say she'd been running a secret operation, so brazen it stunned even veteran detectives. How does a trusted prison officer transform into the architect of a human trafficking ring? What clues were missed? And who finally spoke up? This is not just a story of one arrest. It's a story about power, betrayal, and the hidden world behind prison walls. It was still dark when the task force assembled at a strip mall parking lot on Millstone South Side. For nearly a year, state and federal investigators had worked in secret, piecing together evidence of an officer's alleged crimes. At 6:07 a.m., the convoy rolled quietly toward a single-story brick house with white shutters and a neatly mown lawn. The home belonged to 38-year-old Carla Ruiz, a 12-year veteran of the State Department of Corrections. Perimeter units took their positions. Supervisors opted for a knock-and-announce entry. Ruiz was believed to be alone, but agents knew from intercepted messages that she kept cash and at least one handgun nearby. Doorbell camera footage later obtained by prosecutors shows the moment she answered the door, a DOC t-shirt on, phone in hand. She looked startled, but said nothing as cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Inside, agents began a methodical search, seizing laptops for cell phones, handwritten ledgers, and a lockbox containing passports and IDs belonging to other people. By sunrise, Ruiz was in the back of a patrol car, the uniform folded over her arm, the same uniform she'd worn for over a decade. For neighbors, it was an inexplicable scene. For investigators, it was a culmination of months of covert work. To understand the impact of this arrest, you have to know who Carla Ruiz was supposed to be. Born and raised in Millstone, Ruiz joined the Department of Corrections in 2011 after a stint in the National Guard. She quickly earned a reputation for calm under pressure. In 2016, she was nominated for Correctional Officer of the Year after defusing a tense standoff between inmates. She volunteered for holiday shifts, mentored new recruits, and appeared in recruitment brochures. But colleagues now recall subtle warning signs: unexplained luxury items, sudden weekend trips out of state, and a curious closeness to certain recently released inmates. One co-worker, speaking on condition of anonymity, said, "Carla always had a side hustle, but we thought it was just bartending. No one imagined this." Correctional officers wield enormous power inside prison walls. They control movement, access, and information. With low pay and high stress, the temptation for misconduct can be ever-present. According to Bureau of Justice Statistics data, more than 300 correctional staff nationwide were arrested for crimes related to their jobs last year, though only a tiny fraction involved trafficking. Ruiz's case will become one of the most high-profile. When you have unchecked authority over a vulnerable population, the opportunity for exploitation exists. That's why oversight is crucial. Ruiz allegedly exploited that opportunity. Prosecutors say she used her post to identify vulnerable women, especially those nearing release with little family support or immigration concerns, and offer them jobs or housing, only to coerce them later. The investigation began almost by accident. In May 2022, a state trooper pulled over a young woman on a routine traffic stop. Nervous and tearful, she confided that she had escaped from an abusive situation involving a lady who works at the prison. That tip was passed to the Attorney General's Human Trafficking Unit. Over the next weeks, investigators interviewed the woman under protective conditions. Her story was chilling. Promises of a job, then threats, forced travel across state lines, and confiscated IDs. She named Carla Ruiz as the person behind it. She said, "No one will believe you over me. I'm an officer. I felt trapped." Agents opened a covert case file. They subpoenaed bank records, set up physical surveillance, and obtained warrants for encrypted messaging apps. They traced cash transfers to shell companies registered in relatives' names. In November, they intercepted coded messages arranging transport of packages, believed to mean victims, along interstate highways. Undercover officers posed as drivers, quietly gathering evidence. By February 2023, a grand jury had been briefed. The task force planned a takedown for early April, hoping to catch Ruiz off guard. By day, Ruiz patrolled cell blocks, logged contraband, and wrote disciplinary reports. By night, she allegedly coordinated a clandestine trafficking network. Bank records show tens of thousands of dollars moving through her accounts. Investigators allege she used her knowledge of correctional schedules to evade detection, moving victims when she knew checkpoints were understaffed. She even allegedly used her badge to intimidate. "I can ruin you. I know where you are." It's rare to see someone abuse their official position to this degree. That's what made this case a priority. Carla Ruiz now sits on the other side of the bars she once patrolled, awaiting trial. In Part 2 of Betrayal Behind Bars, we'll hear directly from the women whose lives were upended, and we'll follow investigators as they uncover the full scope of the alleged operation. When the first tip came in, investigators thought it might be an isolated abuse of power. But as interviews continued, a pattern emerged. Victims from different counties described the same sequence: a friendly correctional officer promising help, a job, or a place to stay, a bus ticket, then, once isolated, threats, confiscated ID documents, and forced sex work. She told me she had connections, that she could get me a real job. But when we got to motel, everything changed, said by one of the victims. By the time the task force had spoken with 5 women, their stories lined up almost word for word. This was an opportunistic exploitation. It looked like an organized system. According to the indictment, Ruiz began grooming her targets while they were still inside the correctional facility. She had access to inmate records, knew who lacked family support, and could time her offers around their release dates. Former inmates told investigators that Ruiz would casually chat about opportunities outside. She gave out her personal number, against policy, and sometimes arranged transport on release day. We're not supposed to contact them after they leave, but Carla always said she was just checking on their reentry. Now I think it was more. Once outside, victims say the promises evaporated. Their phones were monitored, their IDs held, and they were shuttled between cheap motels in 3 states. Prosecutors allege Ruiz used her badge and law enforcement jargon to terrify them. She reportedly threatened to have them violated on parole or deported if they disobeyed. Some were forced to sign false employment contracts as cover. It's classic trafficking behavior: isolation, intimidation, control of documents, but with the added power of a government credential. While victim testimony was compelling, investigators needed hard evidence. They began tracing payments from illicit ads to bank accounts linked to Ruiz. Over 6 months, financial analysts mapped a web of small LLCs registered to relatives and ex-inmates. One was listed as a cleaning service, another as a consulting firm. All funneled cash to a single account under Ruiz's name, combined with intercepted messages using code words like packages and appointments. The financial trail transformed a disturbing allegation into a prosecutable case. In January 2023, the task force launched a series of undercover operations. An agent posing as a driver offered to transport one of Ruiz's clients. Hidden cameras captured the exchange of cash and instructions. Another undercover operative answered an online ad linked to the trafficking ring and arranged a meeting which corroborated victims' accounts of coercion. Every move was logged, every handout documented. We wanted airtight evidence, not just testimony, but bank records, surveillance, and control buys. That's why we waited nearly a year before making the arrests. As the investigation widened, agents discovered Ruiz wasn't working alone. Her former boyfriend allegedly handled transport logistics. 2 ex-inmates helped recruit new victims. All are now under indictment. Yet prosecutors describe Ruiz as a hub, the one with official access, insider knowledge, and the credibility to lure victims. I only went with her because she was an officer. I thought I'd be safe. By the spring of 2023, the case file was thick with evidence: victim statements, bank records, undercover footage. On April 14th, the task force finally made its move, arresting Carla Ruiz at dawn. But the story doesn't end there. We'll enter the courtroom, hear the legal battles on both sides, and examine how this case is forcing a reckoning inside the Department of Corrections. April 18th, 2023. 4 days after the arrest, Carla Ruiz was led into a packed federal courtroom wearing a navy jumpsuit. Cameras weren't allowed, but a sketch artist captured her staring straight ahead, expression unreadable. Prosecutors charged her with trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy. The indictment named 2 co-defendants, her ex-boyfriend and a former inmate, as part of the alleged ring. The government is calling this one of the most serious abuses of power ever uncovered in the state's correction system. Assistant U.S. Attorney Megan Carlisle opened with a stark summary. This defendant weaponized her position of trust to exploit the vulnerable. Jurors saw messages Ruiz allegedly sent to victims, financial transfers to shell companies, and undercover video of cash handoffs. Victims testified behind screens, their voices trembling as they described coercion and threats. The prosecution's case was powerful because it combined 3 types of evidence: testimony, paper trail, and direct surveillance. Few trafficking cases have that. Ruiz's attorneys painted a different picture. They said she was simply helping former inmates reintegrate, that money transfers were loans, and that any sexual activity happened without her knowledge. They challenged the credibility of victims with prior convictions and argued that investigators misinterpreted slang in text messages. It's a classic strategy: sow doubt about intent, question witness reliability, frame the accused as a rescuer rather than predator. Midway through the trial, a bombshell email surfaced from Ruiz to her ex-boyfriend titled "Schedule for the Girls." It laid out transport dates and hotel names. The defense called it taken out of context. Then an undercover agent took the stand and played audio of Ruiz instructing him to keep them in line. Jurors leaned forward. The tone in the courtroom shifted. That was the moment everyone knew the defense had an uphill battle. After 4 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberations, the jury returned. On July 28, 2023, Carla Ruiz was found guilty on all counts. She stood as the verdicts were read, showing little emotion. In October, she was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Her co-defendants received lesser but significant terms. The judge called it an egregious abuse of authority. This verdict sends a message: no badge puts you above the law. The case triggered a wave of reforms. The Department of Corrections launched a new integrity unit. Legislators introduced bills requiring stricter monitoring of staff contact with ex-inmates. Whistleblowers who had been ignored were now called to testify before oversight committees. Training manuals were rewritten and random audits of staff communications were mandated. One case doesn't prove the whole system is corrupt, but exposed vulnerabilities. And now there's a blueprint for plugging them. At its core, this isn't just a story of a rogue officer. It's about the thin line between power and exploitation, and the hidden world behind prison walls. For the victims, justice has begun, but healing will take far longer. For the public, the case is a reminder that oversight of those who wield authority is not optional, it's essential. Subscribe to the channel so you never get to miss a story like this. Stay tuned because the next story would pull goosebumps.